December 18, 1944, Richmond, Virginia. At 2:34 in the afternoon, a Western Union messenger named Tommy Riggs, 16 years old and too young for the draft by 18 months, climbed the wooden steps to 2847 Hanover Avenue carrying a yellow telegram in his leather pouch. He had delivered 43 telegrams that month. 12 of them had been the kind that made women scream. Mary Brookins saw him through the front window. She was standing at the kitchen sink, 8 months pregnant, washing lunch dishes in water she'd heated on the stove because the gas company had restricted daytime service to conserve fuel. Her hands were in the soapy water when she saw the Western Union bicycle lean against her fence. Her hands went to her belly. The baby kicked once, hard. Tommy Riggs wouldn't look at the house as he walked up the path. That was how Mary knew. Good telegrams. The messengers looked up. They smiled. They walked faster. Bad telegrams. They studied their shoes and moved like they were walking to a funeral. Tommy Riggs was studying his shoes. Mary dried her hands on her apron. The dish towel had small red cardinals embroidered on it. Richard had bought it for her last Christmas, their second Christmas married, back when Christmas meant something other than rationing and casualty lists. She walked to the front door. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. The baby kicked again. Tommy knocked 3 times. Soft knocks, apologetic knocks. Mary opened the door. Tommy held out the telegram. His hand was shaking. He was 16 years old, and his hand was shaking because he knew what the yellow paper meant, and he had to watch her read it. "Mrs. Brookins!" His voice cracked on her name. Mary took the telegram. Western Union, War Department. The words were printed in block capitals. Official. Final. The kind of typography that didn't allow for hope. "Regret to inform you. Report received state staff. Sergeant Richard J. Brookins missing in action. Since 16 December in Belgium, stop if further details or other information received, you will be promptly notified. Stop." Mary read it twice. The words didn't change. Missing in action. December 16th. Belgium. 2 days ago. He had been missing for 2 days, and she was just now learning about it. For 2 days she had been washing dishes and hanging laundry and talking to neighbours about the weather while Richard had been missing. While Richard had been dying. While Richard had been dead. The telegram didn't say dead. It said missing. But Mary Brookins had lived through 2 years of war. She had read the newspapers. She knew the statistics. She knew what missing in action meant when the telegram came from Belgium in December of 1944. It meant the Germans had launched their winter offensive. It meant American lines had broken. It meant men were surrounded, cut off, killed before anyone could identify the bodies. Missing in action was what the War Department said when they meant dead, but couldn't prove it yet. Mary's knees gave out. She sat down on the floor in her front hallway, still holding the telegram. Tommy Riggs stood in the doorway, not knowing whether to leave or stay. From next door, Mrs. Henderson saw Mary collapse through her own front window. She came running without putting on a coat. Mrs. Henderson was 62 years old. Her son had died at Anzio in January. She knew what yellow telegrams looked like. She took one look at Mary on the floor and knew. She knelt beside her, took the telegram, read it in 3 seconds. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Henderson said. That was all. Just those 2 words. Because what else was there to say? Tommy Riggs left. He had 4 more telegrams to deliver that afternoon. Mary stayed on the floor for 11 minutes. Mrs. Henderson stayed with her, one hand on her shoulder, not speaking. The baby kicked 3 more times. Mary put her hand over her belly and wondered if her son would ever meet his father. Wondered if Richard had known she was pregnant. He'd known. She'd written to him in October, the day after the doctor confirmed it. The letter would have reached him by November. He'd known he was going to be a father. Had known. Past tense. Because missing in action meant dead, and everyone knew it even if the War Department wouldn't say it yet. Mary's last letter from Richard had arrived on December 10th, 8 days ago. He'd written it on December 3rd. The sensors had blacked out most of the details about his location, but she'd been able to read enough. He was somewhere cold, somewhere with forests, somewhere the 101st Airborne had been rushed to as emergency reinforcements. He'd mentioned hoping for a Christmas furlough. He'd mentioned wanting to be home for the baby. He'd signed the letter, "Love always, Richard," and drawn a small heart next to his name. He was 26 years old, and he'd drawn a heart on a letter because he was going to be a father, and he wanted his wife to know he loved her. Mary stood up. Mrs. Henderson helped her to the couch. The living room had a Christmas tree in the corner, half decorated. They'd put it up on December 15th, 3 days ago. She'd been planning to finish decorating it today. There were wrapped presents underneath it. 3 of them were for Richard. Socks, handkerchiefs, and a new fountain pen. Things you could mail to a soldier overseas. Things he would never receive now. On the mantel above the couch sat a photograph. Richard in his uniform, taken at Fort Benning, Georgia, in July of 1944. He was smiling. He looked young. He looked like someone who thought he was going to survive the war. Mary picked up a notepad from the side table. The notepad had, "From the desk of Mary Brookins," printed at the top. Richard had given it to her for her birthday. She began to write. "Dear War Department." The words came slowly. "I am writing to request any additional information regarding my husband, Staff Sergeant Richard J. Brookins." She wrote for 20 minutes. Mrs. Henderson brought her tea she didn't drink. At 4:47 that afternoon, Mary walked to the corner mailbox and dropped the letter inside. She knew it would take weeks for a response. She knew the response would probably say nothing. The War Department didn't have time for individual inquiries. There was a war on. Men were dying faster than the casualty reports could be typed. She walked back to her house. Her belly felt heavy. The baby hadn't kicked in an hour. At the front steps, she stopped and looked at her house. The house Richard had saved for. The house they'd bought together in 1942. The house where they were supposed to raise their son. Not at Christmas, she'd thought when she saw the messenger. Please God, not at Christmas. But it was Christmas, December 18th, 1 week until Christmas Day. And Richard was missing in Belgium. 4,000 miles away, in a frozen foxhole outside Bastogne, Richard Brookins had 47 hours to live. He didn't know it yet. He didn't know a German tank offensive was rolling toward his position. He didn't know his unit would be surrounded by morning. He didn't know the War Department had already classified him as missing in action. He didn't know Mary had received the telegram. Didn't know she thought he was dead. Didn't know she was 8 months pregnant and sitting alone in their house wondering how to raise a son without a father. Richard Brookins had 47 hours to live, and he was spending them trying to stay warm. December 20th, 1944. 0600 hours. Bastogne, Belgium. Staff Sergeant Richard Brookins crouched in a foxhole 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide, carved into frozen ground with entrenching tools that had broken 2 handles. German artillery had been falling for 30 minutes. The shells came in waves. 88mm, 105mm, Nebelwerfer rockets that screamed like dying animals before they hit. The ground shook with each impact. Dirt rained down into the foxhole. Brookins pressed himself against the frozen earth and counted seconds between explosions. The 101st Airborne had been rushed to Bastogne from reserve positions 48 hours earlier. No winter gear, no overcoats. The supply trucks hadn't kept pace with the forced march. Brookins wore a standard M1943 field jacket over a wool shirt. No gloves. His hands were so cold he couldn't feel his fingers. The temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it dropped to 0. Brookins commanded 11 men from Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. They held a section of the northwest perimeter, 200 yards of frozen forest between the town and the German advance. His men occupied 6 foxholes in a staggered line. 20 yards separated each position. Too far for mutual support, too close to avoid a single artillery barrage killing multiple positions. The artillery stopped at 0637. The silence hurt worse than the noise. Brookins rose up and looked over the foxhole rim. Smoke drifted through the pine trees. He could see the next foxhole to his left where Corporal Davis and Private Martinez waited. Couldn't see the foxhole to his right. Trees blocked the line of sight. Movement to the front. 300 yards out. Shadows moving between trees. German infantry advancing in squad-sized elements. Brookins counted 12 men in the first group. Then another group appeared to the right. Then another to the left. At least 40 men. Maybe more in the woods behind them. Brookins checked his rifle. M1 Garand. 8 rounds in the magazine. He had 2 more 8-round clips in his ammunition pouch. 24 rounds total. Before the German offensive began, standard combat load was 80 rounds. Supply had broken down. No resupply convoys had reached Bastogne since December 18th. At 0720 hours, the Germans opened fire. Rifle fire cracked through the trees. Machine gun fire raked the American positions. Bullets snapped overhead, thudded into tree trunks, kicked up frozen dirt along the foxhole rim. Brookins stayed low. His men returned fire. The sound was thin. Individual rifles, not the volume of fire that comes from adequate ammunition. The German advance stalled at 200 yards. They couldn't see the American positions clearly. The pine forest provided concealment for both sides. The firefight became a probe. The Germans testing, looking for weak points. At 0804, they pulled back. Brookins counted casualties. None. Ammunition expenditure, 47 rounds across 6 positions. Less than 5 rounds per man. They couldn't sustain that rate. A runner arrived at 0830. Corporal from battalion headquarters, breathing hard. He carried orders. All units were to maintain defensive positions. No withdrawal authorized. Relief column was approaching from the south. No estimated time of arrival provided. Rations would be distributed that evening. 1 K ration per 2 men. The corporal left before Brookins could ask questions. Brookins shared his K ration with Private Carson in the next foxhole. The K ration contained crackers, processed cheese, a fruit bar, instant coffee, sugar tablets, and 4 cigarettes. They ate half the crackers and saved the rest. Neither man smoked, but they kept the cigarettes for trade value. December 21st brought fog. Heavy fog that reduced visibility to 50 yards. German forces used the fog for infiltration. At 0340 hours, Brookins heard movement to his front. Footsteps on frozen ground, speaking in German. Close, too close. He couldn't see them. He raised his rifle and waited. A shape materialized from the fog. 20 feet away. Brookins fired. The German soldier dropped. Another shape appeared. Brookins worked the Garand's action, fired again. The second soldier fell backward into the fog. Firing erupted along the entire perimeter. Muzzle flashes in the fog. Shouting in German and English. The firefight lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, 2 German soldiers lay dead in front of Brookins' position. His ammunition count dropped to 9 rounds. That afternoon, a German delegation approached under white flag. They delivered a surrender ultimatum to the American command. The German message was formal, typed on official paper. It noted that American forces were surrounded. It promised honorable treatment as prisoners of war. It warned that continued resistance would result in total annihilation. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander, sent back a one-word reply. Nuts! The German officers didn't understand the American slang. An American officer explained. It meant no. It meant go to hell. It meant the 101st Airborne would not surrender. Word spread through the defensive positions. The men laughed. They were surrounded, outnumbered, low on ammunition and food, freezing in foxholes, and their general had told the Germans to go to hell with a single word. The laughter felt good. It felt like defiance. December 22nd, 0820 hours. The German assault came through morning fog, Tanks this time, Panzer fools, their engines rumbling like thunder. Infantry behind the tanks, hundreds of men. The assault hit the northwest perimeter, hit Brookins' section. The first tank appeared at 100 yards. Brookins saw it through the fog. Grey hull, long gun, moving slowly through the trees. He had no anti-tank weapons. The company's single bazooka was positioned 200 yards to his right. He pressed himself into the foxhole and hoped the tank would pass by. The Panzer stopped at 75 yards. Its turret traversed left, then right, searching for targets. German infantry moved past it, using the tank for cover. Brookins counted 20 men, 30 men, 40 men. They were advancing in a loose skirmish line. At 50 yards, Brookins opened fire. His men opened fire. The Germans went to ground. Return fire was immediate and heavy. Machine gun fire from the tank, rifle fire from the infantry. The volume was overwhelming. Brookins fired his 9 rounds in 12 seconds. He reached for another clip. His last clip, 8 rounds. That was all he had left. 8 rounds and 40 German soldiers advancing toward his position. The bazooka team engaged the tank. 2 rockets. The first missed high. The second struck the tank's left track. The Panzer stopped, immobilized, but not destroyed. Its machine gun continued firing. The German infantry used the distraction to advance. They reached 30 yards, 25 yards, 20 yards. Brookins fixed his bayonet. Around him, his men did the same. The metallic click of bayonets locking onto rifle barrels. The sound meant ammunition was gone. The sound meant the next fighting would be hand to hand. At 15 yards, American artillery fired from inside Bastogne. The 101st Organic Artillery, 105mm howitzers. The shells came in danger close, 50 yards in front of the American positions. The explosions tore through the advancing German infantry. Men disappeared in fire and smoke. The German advance broke. Survivors retreated back through the fog. Brookins counted his men. 11 men when the day started. 9 men now. Private Carson was dead. Private First Class Weber was wounded, gut shot, crying for a medic. The medic came but had no morphine. No bandages, except what they could tear from parachute silk scavenged from previous supply drops. That evening, battalion distributed ammunition. 10 rounds per man. 1 K ration per 3 men. Water from shell craters, boiled when fuel was available. The men ate, drank and tried to sleep. Most couldn't. Too cold. Too hungry. Too aware that the Germans would come again. At 16:47 hours, a radio message came through on the company frequency. Fragmentary transmission. Static, but readable. Third Army advancing from the south. Relief column approaching. Estimated time of arrival unknown. Weather preventing air resupply. Hold positions. Help was coming. Brookins told his squad. They nodded. Didn't speak. Words required energy they didn't have. They understood what the message meant. Hold until relief arrives. Hold with 10 rounds per man. Hold in 8-degree weather. Hold or die. In Richmond, Virginia, Mary Brookins sat in her living room, staring at the War Department telegram. December 22nd. 4 days since the telegram arrived. No updates. No additional information. The newspaper that morning carried headlines about American forces surrounded in Belgium. 101st Airborne at Bastogne. She knew Richard was 101st Airborne. She knew Bastogne was where surrounded American paratroopers were fighting impossible odds. She placed both hands on her belly. The baby kicked, strong kicks, healthy kicks. The baby was due in 3 weeks. She wondered if Richard would ever know he had a son. December 23rd, 1944. 04:30 hours. 12 miles south of Bastogne. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams sat in the lead Sherman tank of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division, studying a map by red flashlight. His mission was simple. Break through German defensive positions and reach the surrounded 101st Airborne before they ran out of ammunition. Intelligence estimated the paratroopers had 48 hours of combat capability remaining. Maybe less. Abrams commanded 50 Sherman tanks in the spearhead column. Behind the tanks came half-tracks carrying infantry. Behind the infantry came supply trucks and ambulances. The column stretched 3 miles along a narrow country road. The road was the only route north. German forces controlled the surrounding terrain. The Sherman M4A3E8, called the Easy 8, weighed 33 tons. Its 76mm main gun could penetrate most German armour at 500 yards. But German tanks carried 88mm guns that could destroy a Sherman at 1,000 yards. The math favoured the Germans. American tactics compensated with numbers and speed. Move fast. Hit hard. Don't stop. Abrams' tank rolled forward at 05:15 hours. The column followed. 50 tanks, engines roaring, tracks clanking on frozen ground. The noise announced their approach miles in advance. Surprise was impossible. Speed was everything. At 06:27 hours, the column reached Chaumont, a crossroads village, 4 stone buildings, 1 church. German forces had established a roadblock. 2 anti-tank guns positioned behind sandbags, infantry in the buildings. The Germans opened fire at 400 yards. The first round struck the lead Sherman's frontal armour. The shell penetrated. The tank exploded. Ammunition cooking off inside, flames shooting from the hatches. The crew didn't get out. The second Sherman in line pulled left, off the road, and returned fire. Its 76mm gun barked. The German anti-tank position disappeared in smoke and debris. American infantry dismounted from half-tracks and assaulted the buildings. Room-to-room fighting, grenades, rifle fire. The village was cleared in 20 minutes. Cost: 2 Shermans destroyed, 11 men killed, 23 wounded. The column reorganized and continued north. At 08:47 hours, German aircraft appeared. 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, diving from cloud cover. Their 20mm cannons raked the column. Bullets sparked off tank armour. A fuel truck exploded. The fighters made 1 pass and disappeared. American anti-aircraft guns fired too late. The column kept moving. By 1100 hours, the relief column had covered 8 miles. 4 miles remained to Bastogne, but the next 4 miles would be the hardest. German defensive positions grew thicker as the column approached. Every hill held anti-tank guns. Every tree line concealed infantry. Every bend in the road was a potential ambush site. At 13:40 hours, near the village of Assenois, German Panzer IV attacked from concealed positions in a wood line. 5 tanks. They opened fire at 600 yards. American Shermans returned fire. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. 2 Panzers destroyed. 3 Shermans knocked out. The German tanks withdrew. The American column advanced over the burning wrecks. Inside Bastogne, Richard Brookins heard the artillery to the south. Different sound than German artillery. American 105mm howitzers. The sound was moving closer. The relief column was fighting its way through. But how close? How much longer? Brookins had 3 rounds left in his rifle. Around him, his men had similar counts. 2 rounds, 4 rounds. One man had no ammunition at all, just his bayonet. They had held for 3 days. They could hold 1 more day. Maybe, if the Germans didn't launch another major assault. At 15:20 hours, German loudspeakers blared across the perimeter. Propaganda broadcasts recorded messages in English. The voice was calm, almost friendly. It explained that American forces were surrounded, that resistance was pointless, that Germany would win the war, that surrender meant hot food, medical care, and survival. The voice promised that wounded men would receive treatment, that prisoners would be treated according to Geneva Convention rules. Some men listened. Private Miller in the foxhole to Brookins' left asked if maybe surrender made sense. They were out of ammunition, out of food, freezing. What was the point of dying here? Brookins said the point was that they were told to hold. They were paratroopers. They didn't surrender. They held until relieved or until dead. Those were the only two options. Miller went quiet. He didn't ask again. December 24th, 0200 hours, Christmas Eve. The temperature dropped to 3 degrees below zero. German forces launched a night assault. No artillery preparation, just infantry moving through darkness. They hit Brookins' section at 0217 hours. Brookins heard them before he saw them. Boots on frozen ground, equipment rattling. He raised his rifle. 3 rounds. He had to make them count. A shape appeared at the foxhole rim. Brookins fired. The German soldier fell backward. Another shape. Brookins fired. 2 rounds left. The fighting became hand-to-hand. Germans jumping into foxholes. Americans fighting with entrenching tools, with bayonets, with anything they could use as weapons. Brookins used his rifle butt as a club, swung it like a baseball bat. Felt it connect with skull, with bone. A German soldier tackled him. They rolled in the frozen dirt. Brookins got his hands around the man's throat. Squeezed until the struggling stopped. The assault lasted 19 minutes. When it ended, 3 more German soldiers lay dead in front of Brookins's position. His ammunition was gone. Both remaining rounds fired in the first 30 seconds. He had his bayonet and his entrenching tool. That was all. At 0340 hours, a German mortar round landed near Brookins' foxhole. Shrapnel tore through his left leg. He felt the impact, felt something hot slice through muscle. Looked down, blood soaking through his trousers. A lot of blood. He pressed both hands against the wound and tried to slow the bleeding. Private Williams crawled over from the next foxhole. Tore open a first aid kit. The kit contained 1 bandage and 1 pack of sulfur powder. Williams dumped the powder on the wound and wrapped the bandage tight. The bandage soaked through in 30 seconds. Williams used his own bandage, then tore strips from a dead German's uniform and made more bandages. The bleeding slowed, but didn't stop. Brookins stayed in his foxhole. Couldn't walk. Couldn't evacuate to the aid station. He would hold his position. He would die in this foxhole if necessary. But he would hold. In Richmond, Virginia, Mary Brookins woke at 0730 hours, Christmas Eve morning. She had slept poorly. The baby kept her awake with constant movement, strong kicks. The baby was active, healthy, due in 3 weeks but showing signs of coming early. At 0845 hours, Mary felt the first contraction. Not painful, just a tightening across her belly. She ignored it. Braxton Hicks' contractions were normal in the final weeks. She continued preparing breakfast. Toast and weak coffee. The toast used the last of the week's bread ration. At 0920 hours, another contraction, stronger this time, 7 minutes after the first. Mary sat down at the kitchen table, put both hands on her belly, felt the tightness, felt it release. This wasn't Braxton Hicks. This was labor. 3 weeks early. She walked next door, knocked. Mrs. Henderson answered. Mary said 3 words. "The baby's coming." Mrs. Henderson called Dr. Morrison. He arrived at 10:15 hours, examined Mary, confirmed labor. Contractions were 7 minutes apart and regular. But the baby's position was wrong. Breech presentation. The baby was positioned feet first instead of head first. Dr. Morrison's expression went serious. Breech deliveries were dangerous, high risk of complications. He said they needed to go to the hospital. Now. At 10:47 hours, Mary arrived at Richmond General Hospital. A nurse took her to the labor ward, put her in a bed, checked her contractions. 5 minutes apart now. The baby was coming fast. Too fast for a breech delivery. Dr. Morrison scrubbed in, prepared for emergency procedures. In Belgium, 15:20 hours, Creighton Abrams relief column was 2 miles from Bastogne. 2 miles. German resistance was fierce. Every 100 yards was bought with blood and burning tanks, but the column kept pushing. Had to reach Bastogne before dark. Had to reach the paratroopers while they could still fight. Inside Bastogne, Richard Brookins lay in his foxhole, bleeding. His leg felt cold, numb. He knew what that meant. Shock, blood loss. He was dying. Slowly, but dying. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a photograph. Mary, taken before he deployed. She was smiling, young, beautiful. He stared at the photograph, memorized her face one more time. He would never see her again, would never meet his child, would die in this frozen hole in Belgium on Christmas Eve. The artillery to the south grew louder, closer. The relief column was coming. But would they arrive in time? Would Richard Brookins live long enough to be saved? December 24th, 1944. 14:30 hours Belgium time. 8:30 hours Richmond time. 2 places, 2 battles, both measured in minutes. Belgium first. German Panzer tanks breached the northwest perimeter at 14:30 hours. 2 Panzer IVs, engines roaring, crashed through the tree line 200 yards from Brookins' position. Behind the tanks came German infantry, at least 60 men. They advanced in a wedge formation, using the tanks for cover. American defensive fire was sporadic, thin, men firing single shots instead of sustained bursts. They had no ammunition for sustained fire. Brookins lay in his foxhole, unable to stand. Blood soaked through all the bandages on his leg. He had no rifle rounds left, no grenades, just a bayonet and the photograph of Mary clutched in his left hand. At 14:37 hours, the order came down the line. Fall back to secondary positions. The perimeter was collapsing. Men crawled from their foxholes and moved east, toward Bastogne. Brookins couldn't move. His leg wouldn't support weight. Private Williams tried to help him up. Brookins pushed him away, told him to go. Save yourself. Williams hesitated. German machine gun fire raked their position. Williams ran. Brookins was alone. He could see German soldiers advancing, 50 yards away now. He pulled himself to the edge of his foxhole, fixed his bayonet to his empty rifle. If they wanted him, they would have to come get him. He wouldn't die lying down. At 14:42 hours, he heard engines. Different pitch than German Panzers. Higher RPM. American engines. He turned his head, saw movement through the trees to his right. A Sherman tank crashed through the perimeter, American White Star visible on its turret. Then another Sherman, then another. The 37th Tank Battalion had arrived. The lead Sherman engaged the German Panzers at point-blank range. 80 yards. The Sherman's 76mm gun fired. The first Panzer exploded. The second Panzer tried to reverse. The Sherman fired again. Direct hit. The Panzer's turret separated from its hull, flipped through the air, crashed into the trees. German infantry broke and ran. American tanks pursued, machine guns firing. The perimeter was secured. The siege was broken. Bastogne was relieved. At 14:49 hours, Brookins lost consciousness. Blood loss, shock, hypothermia. He collapsed back into his foxhole. The photograph of Mary fell from his hand into the frozen dirt. Richmond, Virginia, 08:30 hours. Mary Brookins lay in a hospital bed, labor pains coming every 4 minutes. Dr. Morrison examined her again. The news wasn't good. The baby was still breech, feet first. Contractions were strong, but the baby wasn't descending properly. The umbilical cord might be compressed. Fetal distress was likely. At 08:47 hours, Dr. Morrison made his decision. Emergency delivery. He couldn't wait for the baby to turn. Couldn't risk the cord compression getting worse. He would use forceps to turn the baby during delivery. It was dangerous. For the baby. For Mary. But waiting was more dangerous. Nurses prepared the delivery room, sterilized instruments, set up the ether anesthesia machine. The apparatus looked medieval. A mask, a canister, tubes. In 1944, ether was standard for difficult deliveries. It put the mother completely unconscious. Let the doctor work without the mother feeling pain or panic. At 08:55 hours, they placed the mask over Mary's face. She smelled the sweet chemical odour, tried not to breathe it, couldn't help breathing it. The room started spinning. She heard Dr. Morrison's voice saying count backwards from 10. She got to 7. Then everything went black. Belgium. 14:52 hours. A medic reached Brookins Foxhole. The medic's name was Daniels, 22 years old, from Ohio. He'd been a medical student before the war. He jumped into the foxhole and immediately checked for a pulse. Found one. Weak, rapid, thready. Brookins was alive, but barely. Daniels cut away Brookins' trousers, saw the leg wound. Shrapnel had torn through the femoral area, not the artery, or Brookins would already be dead. But close enough. Muscle damage, significant blood loss. Daniels applied a tourniquet above the wound, tightened it until the bleeding stopped. Brookins didn't respond, still unconscious. At 15:05 hours, 2 men carried Brookins on a stretcher to a half-track. They loaded him with 5 other wounded men. The half-track drove through Bastonia's streets to the aid station, a converted warehouse, tables set up as operating surfaces, blankets hung as privacy curtains, blood on the floor, the smell of antiseptic and gangrene. A doctor examined Brookins at 15:20 hours, checked the tourniquet, checked his pulse, checked his eyes. The doctor was tired. He'd been operating for 18 hours straight. He looked at Brookins's leg and made his assessment. The leg could be saved. Maybe. With proper surgery. With antibiotics. With time and luck. But Brookins would live. That much was certain. Richmond, 09:20 hours. Mary was unconscious. Dr. Morrison began the forceps delivery. He inserted the metal instruments, guided them around the baby's head, applied gentle traction. The baby didn't move. He applied more pressure. The baby started to turn, slowly. The nurses monitored Mary's breathing, monitored her heartbeat. Everything was stable. At 09:42 hours, the baby was delivered. A boy. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. But he wasn't breathing. His skin was blue, grey. Dr. Morrison held the baby upside down, cleared his airway with a suction bulb. Nothing, no response. He laid the baby on a table, rubbed his chest vigorously, stimulating the lungs. The heart. Still no response. At 09:43 hours, Dr. Morrison used his finger to sweep the baby's mouth again. Checking for obstructions, found nothing. He picked up the baby, held him by the ankles, slapped his back, once, twice, 3 times. At 09:45 hours, the baby cried. A weak cry, but a cry. His skin started turning pink, his lungs filled with air. He was breathing. He was alive. Nurses wrapped the baby in a blanket, placed him in a warming bassinet. Dr. Morrison turned back to Mary. She was still unconscious. He completed the delivery procedures. Sutured. Cleaned. She had lost blood, but not a dangerous amount. She would recover. Both mother and son would survive. At 09:50 hours, Mary began to wake. The ether wore off slowly. She opened her eyes. Everything was blurry. She heard a baby crying. Her baby. She tried to speak. Her mouth was dry. A nurse appeared above her. The nurse was smiling. That was a good sign. Nurses didn't smile when things went wrong. The nurse said, "You have a son, Mrs. Brookins. He's perfect." Mary started crying. Relief, joy, exhaustion. She had a son. Richard had a son. Richard would never know. Richard was missing in Belgium. Richard was probably dead, but their son was alive. At 10:15 hours, Dr. Morrison came to Mary's bedside. He explained what had happened. The breech delivery, the forceps, the baby not breathing at first. But everything was fine now. The baby was healthy, strong. He would need to stay in the hospital for observation. Premature babies needed extra care, but he would be fine. Mary asked if she could see him. They brought the baby to her, wrapped in a white blanket. His eyes were closed. His tiny fists were clenched. Mary held him. looked at his face. He had Richard's nose, Richard's chin. She started crying again. At 10:45 hours, Mary asked the nurse a question. Had any telegrams arrived? Any news from the War Department? Any updates about her husband? The nurse said she would check. She left the room, walked to the hospital's administrative office, asked if any telegrams had been delivered for Mrs. Mary Brookins, room 347. The clerk checked the log, said yes. 1 telegram. Arrived at 12:15 hours. Delivered to the hospital by Western Union messenger 15 minutes ago. The nurse took the telegram. Yellow envelope. Western Union. War Department. Her hands shook as she carried it back to Mary's room. She'd delivered telegrams to patients before. She knew what they usually said. She knew what yellow envelopes meant during wartime. But when she opened this telegram and read it, she covered her mouth, started crying. This telegram was different. This one didn't say dead. This one didn't say missing. This telegram said something else entirely. The nurse walked into Mary's hospital room at 12:30 hours, December 24th. Mary was sitting up in bed, holding her newborn son. The baby was sleeping. Mary looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Pale skin. But she was awake and alert. She saw the yellow envelope in the nurse's hand, and her expression changed. Fear replaced exhaustion. "No," Mary said. "Please don't!" The nurse was crying and smiling at the same time. Tears running down her cheeks but smiling. Mary couldn't process it. Nurses didn't smile when they brought bad news telegrams. They looked sad. They looked apologetic. They didn't smile. "Mrs. Brookins," the nurse said, "it's good news." Mary stared at her. Good news. Those words didn't make sense together. Telegram. War Department. Good news. The words didn't fit. She held her baby tighter without meaning to. The baby stirred but didn't wake. The nurse handed her the telegram. Mary took it with her free hand. Western Union. War Department. Official typography. Block capitals. She read it once, then again, then a third time. The words didn't change. Status changed. Stop staff. Sergeant Richard J. Brookins, wounded in action, 24 December. Stop non-life, threatening. Stop, currently receiving medical treatment. Bastogne, Belgium. Stop, further information to follow. Stop, War Department. Wounded in action. Not missing in action. Not killed in action. Wounded in action. Non-life threatening. Currently receiving medical treatment. The telegram was dated December 24th, 1944, and sent at 0600 hours Eastern Wartime, 8 hours ago. Richard had been wounded 8 hours ago, and she was just learning about it now. But he was alive. Wounded, but alive. Alive. Mary read the telegram again. The word wounded scared her, but the words non-life threatening gave her hope. He was hurt but not dying. He was in a hospital, but not in a grave. He was coming home. Eventually. Someday. He was coming home. "He's alive," Mary said. Her voice broke. "He's wounded, but alive." She looked down at her baby, at Richard's son. "Your father is alive," she whispered. The baby made a small sound. Not quite a cry, just a sound. Mary held him close and let herself cry properly for the first time in 6 days. Mrs. Henderson arrived at the hospital at 1400 hours. Someone had called her with the news. She brought a small Christmas tree, 2 feet tall, in a pot, set it on the table beside Mary's bed. The tree had pre-war glass ornaments, red and gold and silver. Mrs. Henderson had saved them since before the war, when such things were still available in stores. Other neighbours came throughout the afternoon. Mr. Pettigrew brought a card signed by everyone on Hanover Avenue. The Johnsons brought cookies made with hoarded sugar rations. Father Murphy from St. Patrick's stopped by at 16:30 hours. He'd heard about the telegram, wanted to offer thanks to God for Richard's survival. Mary wasn't particularly religious, but she let Father Murphy pray. It couldn't hurt. At 1800 hours, the hospital served Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey. Real turkey. Not much of it. Small portions because of rationing. But real turkey with gravy and mashed potatoes. Mary ate 3 bites and couldn't eat more. Her stomach was too tight. Too much emotion. Too much relief. Food didn't seem important. She asked the nurse about wounded soldiers, about recovery times, about what non-life-threatening meant exactly. The nurse explained that it depended on the wound. Shrapnel wounds could heal in weeks or months. Broken bones took longer, burns even longer. But non-life-threatening meant he would recover, meant he would live, meant eventually he would come home. Mary did the math in her head. If he was wounded December 24th, he'd be in a field hospital for days, maybe a week, then evacuated to a rear hospital, maybe England, maybe France. Recovery time varied, could be weeks, could be months, but he was out of combat. No more fighting, no more risk. The war was over for Richard Brookins, even if the war itself continued. Belgium, 1830 hours, December 24th. Richard Brookins lay on a cot in the Bastogne aid station. His left leg was bandaged from hip to knee. The bandages were clean, white, changed an hour ago. The wound had been cleaned with sulfur powder. Antibiotics to prevent infection. The doctor said he'd keep the leg. Said he'd walk again. Said he'd limp for the rest of his life, but he'd walk. Richard didn't care about limping. He cared about living. The aid station was crowded. 50 wounded men on cots, some sleeping, some moaning, some silent in the way that meant they were dying. Medical staff moved between cots, checking bandages, administering morphine, recording information on clipboards. The staff looked exhausted. They'd been working since the siege began. No sleep, no breaks, just wounded men arriving continuously. A lieutenant from communications found Richard at 1920 hours, asked his name, rank, serial number. The lieutenant was updating casualty reports, recording who was wounded, who was dead, who was missing. The information would be transmitted to division headquarters, then to Paris, then to Washington, then to families. The lieutenant wrote Richard's information on a form: name, rank, unit, type of wound, severity. The form would generate a telegram, would reach Mary in days, would tell her he was wounded but alive. Richard didn't know Mary had already received the telegram, didn't know she'd given birth that morning, didn't know he was a father. He only knew his leg hurt and he was alive, and the siege was over. At 2000 hours, a chaplain moved through the aid station. Christmas Eve service, informal. The chaplain stood in the center of the room and read from a small Bible. Luke chapter 2, the Christmas story, the birth of Jesus, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Some of the wounded men listened. Some didn't. Some were unconscious. The chaplain read anyway. Richard listened. He wasn't particularly religious, but Christmas Eve in a combat hospital made religion seem more relevant. He thought about Mary, wondered what she was doing. Probably at home. Probably alone except for neighbors. Probably worried. Probably thought he was dead. The first telegram would have said missing in action. She'd been living with that for 6 days. 6 days of thinking he was dead. He asked a medic for paper and a pencil. The medic brought him both. Richard wrote a letter. His handwriting was shaky. His hands weren't steady. Pain medication made his thinking fuzzy. But he wrote, "Dear Mary, I'm alive. I was wounded, but I'm okay. They say I'll recover. I'm in a hospital in Belgium. I don't know when I'll get home, but I'm coming home. I promise. I love you. Always. Richard." He folded the letter, addressed it, 2847, Hanover Avenue, Richmond, Virginia, gave it to the medic. The medic said it would go out with the next mail delivery, probably wouldn't reach Richmond until mid-January, 3 weeks. But it would reach her, eventually. What Richard didn't know was that Mary already knew, had known for 8 hours, was holding their son and waiting. Richmond, 2,200 hours. Mary lay in her hospital bed, unable to sleep. The baby slept in a bassinet beside her bed. The small Christmas tree sat on the table, ornaments reflecting the hallway lights. Outside, church bells rang across Richmond. Midnight approaching, Christmas Day arriving. Mary stared at the telegram on her bedside table, read it again in the dim light. Wounded in action, non-life-threatening. The words were better than missing in action, infinitely better than killed in action. But they still scared her. Wounded meant pain, meant suffering, meant months of not knowing exactly how bad it was. But wounded also meant alive, meant coming home, meant their son would meet his father. She looked at the baby, Richard James Brookins Jr., born December 24th, 1944. Christmas Eve baby. The best Christmas present she'd ever received. Well, second best. The telegram was the best. The baby was second. Both on the same day. Both miracles. The baby woke at 2330 hours. Crying. Hungry. A nurse helped Mary with feeding. The nurse was gentle. Patient. Showed Mary how to hold him. How to support his head. Mary had never done this before. Never held a baby this small. Her hands shook. The nurse said she was doing fine. All new mothers were nervous. It would get easier. At midnight, the church bells grew louder. Christmas Day, December 25th, 1944. Mary held her son and thought about Richard in Belgium, wounded, in pain, but alive. Alive. That word meant everything. She whispered to the baby, "Your father's coming home. I don't know when, but he's coming home." Christmas Day, 1944, arrived with snow in Belgium and sun in Virginia. Richard Brookins watched dawn through the aid station window, his leg throbbing despite morphine. Mary Brookins watched dawn through her hospital window, her son sleeping in her arms. Both were thinking of each other. Neither knew the other already knew they were alive. December the 26th. Richard was evacuated to a field hospital in Luxembourg, loaded onto an ambulance with 8 other wounded men. The roads were icy. The ambulance skidded twice. The journey took 4 hours for a trip that should have taken 90 minutes. At the Luxembourg hospital, doctors examined his leg again, confirmed the earlier assessment. No permanent damage to major blood vessels or nerves. Muscle trauma. He would recover. He would walk. He would limp. December 31st. Richard developed an infection. His legs swelled, turned red. Fever spiked to 103 degrees. Doctors administered penicillin, the new miracle drug, available in military hospitals since 1943. The infection cleared within 48 hours. Richard's fever broke on January 2nd, 1945. January 15th. Richard was evacuated to England, a hospital ship across the English Channel. Then a train to a rehabilitation facility outside London. Physical therapy began immediately. Learning to walk again. His left leg was stiff, painful. The muscles had atrophied during 3 weeks of bed rest. Therapists made him stand, made him take steps, made him walk despite the pain. He cursed them, hated them, kept walking. In Richmond, Mary received Richard's first letter on January 16th. The letter he'd written Christmas Eve in Bastogne. She read it 20 times. His handwriting was shaky but readable. The words were simple but enough. "I'm alive. I'm coming home. I love you." She kept the letter in her pocket, touched it throughout the day to remind herself it was real. She wrote back immediately, told him about the baby, about Richard James Brookins Jr., born December 24th, same day Richard was wounded. 7 pounds 3 ounces, healthy, perfect. She included a photograph. The baby at 3 weeks old, eyes open, tiny fists clenched. She mailed the letter knowing it would take 2 weeks to reach England. knowing Richard would see his son's face for the first time in a photograph. February through April passed in letters. Mary wrote twice weekly. Richard wrote whenever doctors allowed. He told her about physical therapy, about learning to walk, about the limp that wouldn't go away. Mary told him about the baby, about first smiles, about sleeping through the night, about neighbours who helped, about waiting for him to come home. April 15th. Richard received his promotion to Sergeant First Class, received his Purple Heart and Bronze Star in a ceremony at the rehabilitation hospital. An officer pinned the medals to his uniform. Read citations. Richard stood at attention. His leg hurt. He didn't care. The medals meant recognition, meant honour. But mostly they meant the war was over for him, meant going home. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrendered. VE Day. Victory in Europe. Richard was still in England, still in rehabilitation, still learning to walk without a crutch. The war he'd fought in was over, but he wasn't home yet. Military bureaucracy moved slowly, processing paperwork, arranging transport, thousands of wounded men waiting for ships to America. May through July. More waiting, more paperwork, more rehabilitation. Richard could walk now, with a pronounced limp. His left leg was shorter than his right by half an inch. The muscles never fully recovered. He used a cane. Would use a cane for the rest of his life. Doctors said he was fit for discharge. Fit to go home. August 10th, 1945. Richard received his orders. Transport to United States. Ship leaving Southampton, August 11th. Arriving New York, August 18th. Train to Richmond, August 19th. Expected arrival. Richmond, August 12th. 14:30 hours, Southern Railway Station. He sent a telegram to Mary that day. Simple message. Coming home. The telegram arrived in Richmond 2 hours later. August 12th, 1945. Mary stood on the platform at Southern Railway Station at noon. 2 hours early. She wore the blue dress from their wedding photograph, the dress Richard had last seen her wearing in September 1944. 11 months ago. She held Richard Jr., 7 months old now. He could sit up, could grab things, could smile and laugh and make sounds that almost seemed like words. The platform filled with people. Other wives, other mothers, other families waiting for men to come home. Everyone dressed nicely. Everyone holding flowers or signs. Everyone watching the tracks for the first sight of the train. At 14:27 hours, the train arrived. 3 minutes early. Steam hissing. Brakes squealing. The train was long. 15 passenger cars. Men began stepping down onto the platform. Soldiers in uniform. Some on crutches. Some in wheelchairs. Some walking but changed. Thinner. Older. Scarred. Mary scanned faces, looking for Richard. Didn't recognize him at first. He was 40 pounds lighter than when he deployed. His face was gaunt, hollow cheeks, deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was using a cane, walking with a pronounced limp. But it was Richard, her Richard, still alive. Their eyes met across 40 feet of platform. Richard dropped his duffel bag, started walking toward her. The limp was obvious. Each step looked painful. But he kept walking. Mary walked toward him, the baby in her arms. 20 feet apart. The baby started crying, startled by the noise and the crowd, 10 feet apart. Richard saw his son's face, really saw it. Not in a photograph, in person, living, moving, real. They met in the middle. Mary wanted to throw her arms around him, but the baby was between them. Richard reached out, touched the baby's face with one finger. The baby grabbed his finger, held tight with a tiny hand. "Is this him?" Richard asked. His voice was hoarse, rough. "Richard Jr.," Mary said. "Richie!" Richard looked at Mary, at his wife, at the woman who'd waited 11 months, who'd received 2 telegrams, who'd given birth alone, who'd raised their son alone, who'd hoped when hope seemed impossible. "I kept my promise," Richard said. I came home. I never doubted, Mary lied. She had doubted. Every day, every telegram, every newspaper headline. But he was home now, and the doubt didn't matter anymore. Richard Brookins was discharged from the army on September 15, 1945, with 30% disability due to his leg wound. He took a job as a postal carrier in Richmond, walked 6 miles daily delivering mail despite his limp. Never complained. Worked the same route for 36 years until retirement in 1982. Mary and Richard had 4 more children, born 1947, 1949, 1952, and 1955. Richard Jr. became a career army officer, served in Vietnam, retired as a colonel in 1992. All 5 children grew up hearing the story of Christmas 1944, the telegram that said missing in action, the birth on Christmas Eve, the second telegram that arrived the same day, the 6 days between despair and hope. Richard kept both telegrams, had them framed side by side, hung them on the living room wall. The first telegram dated December 18th, the second dated December 24th. 6 days between the two. 6 days that felt like 6 years. 6 days that changed everything. Every Christmas, the family gathered at Richard and Mary's house. Every Christmas, they read both telegrams aloud. The tradition started in 1946 and continued for 56 years. Richard Jr. read them after he learned to read. Later, his children read them. Then his grandchildren. The first telegram, the one that said missing in action, the one that meant dead even though it didn't say dead. The second telegram, the one that said wounded in action, the one that meant alive, the one that arrived on Christmas Eve, the same day Mary gave birth, the same day Richard was wounded in Belgium. And Mary would always say the same thing after the telegrams were read. Best Christmas present I ever got. Both of them. She meant Richard coming home. She meant Richie being born. She meant the telegram arriving exactly when she needed it most. Richard would add, "I was just trying to make it home for Christmas." Mary would smile. "You did. Just one Christmas late." Richard Brookins died on January 3rd, 2002, at age 83. Mary died 14 months later, on March 12th, 2003, at age 81. They were married 58 years. The 2 telegrams remained framed on the wall of their house. When their children cleaned out the house after Mary's death, they fought over who would keep them. Richard Jr. won. He hung them in his own house. His children see them every day. His grandchildren ask about them. The story gets told again. December 1944. Missing in action. Wounded in action. 6 days. Christmas Eve. A baby born. A father saved. A telegram that changed everything. Some presents are worth waiting for.